Hey, this is Chris Tester, and you're listening to The Cultured Bumpkin.
You're listening to The Cultured Bumpkin, a literature podcast with Jake Phillips, where we present audiobook quality readings of the classics for your enjoyment. Thank you for stopping by. And remember, just because you're a bumpkin doesn't mean you can't be cultured. Thank you so much for coming on. I am a big fan of yours.
I'm a big fan of yours, so that's okay. We're all right then. Okay.
That's very flattering, sir. The first time I ever saw you was on it was on TikTok, and it was in I don't know what it's called, but you know, like the skin tight suit with the different
Oh yeah. The
points.
The mocap suit with all of the different kind of like baubles on it and stuff like that, which is pretty space age. I don't know what the terminology is either, but yeah. Mocap suit, yes.
Gotcha. And what was that project for, and what was because I'm going to link that in the show notes, because I want the listener, I want you to go and watch this. One, you can see, put a face to the lovely, glorious voice, but also to see, because I know a lot of people, they're good voice actors, but not necessarily good camera actors. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is fine, totally fine.
Yeah, no, totally.
In this, when you do a monologue, let's say, not only is the voice, there and all the nuances and everything is amazing, but your facial expressions and everything, it's like I'm watching a real person really going through that mentally, and that's wonderful.
Well, I mean, I think, as I'm sure you know, I mean, they're so interlinked, and seeing, without kind of making it a whole mutual loving, but hey, I mean, I think that's the same, when we see, in your videos, or the stuff that affects you, in different kind of ways. So, I mean, I treat it all as a whole. That particular example, so it was just for a kind of like a mocap course, essentially, because I'd done a little bit of mocap, but then it's the thing about like, do I need a reel? No, you don't need a reel. But anyway, should I just so that casting directors go like, but what does he look like in a suit? Can he even fit into one? So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll pay that just to kind of box tick. But it was this 2-day course, and it was run by it's a company called the Performance Capture Academy. And it's but specifically by a guy called Neil Newbon. And Neil Newbon is, I think, as they frequently are, he is a coach, but he's also an actor. So, and he does a load of mocap stuff, and that's partly because he has a military background, and he has a stunt background and a martial arts background. And if you're doing the motion capture stuff, quite often that's a big thing. I have none of those specialities. So I am more in the performance capture as opposed to the motion capture. So I ain't going to be able to load a gun, let alone fire it in a particularly, in a particularly realistic way. Sure. But I could maybe act like I could, I could say it in a sad way or whatever. But I mean, because he's an actor and he does a load of games, it was just interesting working with him because, again, he's just like a performer that I really kind of like respected. And one of those things that we worked on various different scenes, and then it was kind of like bring a monologue. And that particular monologue was from a stage adaptation that I performed previously, a few years prior, of Dracula. And that was written by a guy called Ross McGregor, who was also the guy who wrote the first speech that I suppose kind of went quote unquote viral on my account, the one about Zeus, the one about the internet, talking about the internet.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, and it was just nice to revisit something. When I wasn't doing a Eastern European accent as I was when I was playing Dracula. I mean, it wasn't quite that bad, but there was a little, I had a fucking cape and I had red eyes. Pictures are available on my website of what I looked like. I looked quite like Dracula. So to be able to go back and go like, okay, don't worry about the accent. Just think about, the relationship to the person that you're speaking to. So it was just nice to be able to kind of revisit that and kind of connect with the material, which is ultimately always at the end of the day, you're always looking for what's the human element. And, when we were doing that original stage production of Dracula, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, but what's the interesting thing about Dracula as a person? And that whole thing about, isolation, lost love, his relationship with the women in his life, some of whom he kills, some of whom, there's lots of complexities in there. And it's like, in the context of the show, I mean, it's very different, obviously, when I'm covered in balls, essentially, and it's just me. But it can come across as quite heartfelt, because he's basically telling this woman, come with me, live the life, be the woman that you want to be the person that you want to be, because you're not just a woman, save yourself from the patriarchal society and all of that kind of stuff. But in the context of the play, and he's just, he's just broken Van Helsing's neck. And, he's just beaten up, her boyfriend at the time as well. So the context gives it a slightly different energy. So I was just kind of like, actually, it could legitimately be done in this other way, in this all kind of like alternate way. And I suppose that's kind of what's fueled some of the stuff that I post online as a result, is just kind of going like, how can you reframe it? How, these speeches that you do, these monologues, all of this kind of like stuff, what do we bring to it from ourselves? Or especially when you're talking about stuff or dealing with stuff which comes from a particular kind of stylized kind of background, is there a different way that you can recontextualize it? And does it reveal anything more about the writing? Does it show off something different from the writing? That kind of thing. So that's the kind of... But that's the interesting thing about it. But it's hilarious because when I posted that on TikTok, like all of the comments from women generally, well, and some guys as well, they're kind of like, oh God, yeah, take me now, Drac. Oh, isn't it so romantic? Isn't it so beautiful? And you're like, well, yeah, but also, yeah, I mean, to overuse a well-worn phrase, it's a little problematic. But that's the interesting nuance about it. It's like, he's not a bastard. He's been through a lot of shit. And, I mean, potentially he's offering something that none of the other men are. But yeah, within that wider context, he's a complicated character. But thank you for saying that. It's an amazing piece of writing. And, that's what it's all about. It's kind of sharing it, because that was a stage production. So, it played for a couple of months in the UK and then it's gone. And that's both the wonderful thing about theatre, but it's also the sad thing, because it's like, I'm most proud in terms of my own kind of like work in the theatre stuff that I've done. And it's like, I can't point you to it. Or even if there's a video of it, a video of a stage performance ain't ever going to translate in the same way. So,
right.
so
it
even
just lives in the imagination.
Yeah, exactly. So it's well, there's that. It's because it's a live experience. So it's interesting, because with mocap performance, it's kind of that crossover, isn't it? It's that crossover between TV and film and voiceover and all of those kind of things. So yeah, that was just kind of what made it interesting to me as a result, I suppose.
That's so cool. Now, can you tell us about your kind of formal acting training, and then also maybe productions you've been in? But I personally just don't know very many people who have done what you've done from the training side, and then that kind of thing. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. No, I'm a perennial student because I can deal with real life. I don't know. Yeah, in many ways. So I went to university first, and it was only at university that I kind of realized that acting was potentially a thing, and that you could potentially even go to drama school or anything else like that. And I certainly didn't have the confidence to go, right, well, I'll just see if I can make it on my own, because I didn't have that level of experience and confidence. So, I did shows at university and that kind of thing, and that was all kind of like fun. But then I auditioned for drama schools, and certainly at the drama schools in the UK when I was training, they tend to be 2 or 3 year courses, and of all of the courses that I got into, they were all 3 years, so I had to do another 3 years of training. But that was through kind of like talking to, there are people that I knew who did university and then maybe did just like a postgrad, so did just 1 year. But what 1 year of actor training tended to be was like a term of training, like 10 weeks of training. And then you're doing shows and you're out there so that agents and casting directors can have a look at you. And I felt that I needed a bit more than that. So I trained at a place called the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama in London. So that's where Judi Dench trained, but not in my year group. Though Kit Harington of Game of Thrones, famously, he was in my year group. And so, yeah, that was 3 years, and it focused mainly on body and voice and different approaches to text for 2 of those years. And then the third year was about doing public shows and getting out there, getting introduced to the industry and all of that kind of thing. So that was quite a baptism of fire, and it's changed, I think, now. But certainly when I was training, the idea was that, well, if you can do theatre, you can do everything else. So like I think we literally did like 2 hours of voiceover, where someone literally kind of presented a mic and said, learn how close you need to be, and that was essentially our voiceover training. Or TV training was just like, here's a camera. Oh, you look different on camera, don't you? You don't look very pretty. Thanks very much. That kind of thing. So we could all get head up and massively self-conscious about it. Whereas now, they go into camera technique and life on set and all of this kind of stuff. So it's slowly changing, I think. But in my experience, yeah, it was mainly just kind of theatre stuff. So I graduated in 2008. Yeah, 2008. And then mainly have been working in the theatre kind of like ever since. But I think there's an interesting difference between a lot of actors in the UK and a lot of actors in the US, in that for a lot of actors in the US, there tends to be more a mindset of being in class. Like, okay, I'm professional and I've done professional work, but I've got a coach or a series of coaches, or I'm always working on something different, or that kind of thing. Whereas in the UK, again, back in 2008, I can't really speak for now, but back in 2008, it was kind of like, I've done my time. I'm a professional, so I do the job now, right? Unless I'm resting, I just do the job. And I've always kind of had a combination of those kind of things. So I have continued to kind of like do classes, and as doing classes has been more accepted in the UK to be in class. I think there was an association when I graduated that, if you go back to class after drama school, then it means that you must not be confident in your abilities. You feel as if you're missing something. Whereas for me, it was just a question of like keeping sharp and wanting to add to the skills. And the whole reason why my drama school is called Central is because essentially it's a meeting point of loads of different techniques. So you choose what works for you, rather than going like there was a drama school called the Drama Centre, and that's very much kind of like we make method actors here. There's a process that you go through, and when you come out, you will. I mean, their whole philosophy changed over time, as they all did. But that whole idea of you're a drama centre actor and you work in a particular kind of like way, whereas Central was a bit more kind of like, whatever works for you, buddy. Hope something works. So you had a little bit of Stanislavski, a little bit of Meisner, a little bit of different movement stuff, psychology. Patsy Rodenberg, who's a big kind of like voice tutor. All of those different kind of techniques, and then you kind of work out through trial and error what works for you, and that might change from job to job to job.
Interesting.
Yeah, hopefully.
As a voice actor, I did not have a lot of training, but one thing was, because I was working, I was getting the real life stuff.
Yeah.
I was in a factory, when I started sort of doing my own training, and I did take some courses. I did some community theater.
Yep.
I got experience in what ways that I could. But I think one of the best ways that I've found to improve is listen to Tom Hiddleston read poetry and then try and mimic his nuance. That's how I kind of started.
Mm-hmm.
And being that this is a literature podcast, I would love to hear you maybe give tell us what you're about to hear, and then we'll hear you read the poem. You know what
Okay,
I'm saying?
sure, sure. So, the poem that I've chosen is "Oh Captain, My Captain" by Walt Whitman, which is hilarious. Not necessarily the actual theme of the poem, but considering as a UK actor, and it's obviously a very American story. Based on events that actually kind of like took place. But again, I think it kind of like exists in that kind of intersection between being a very specific event, and yet also incredibly universal, maybe. So you can project whatever you want to project into it. So I'll probably try and project something into it and see what happens. That makes sense.
Now, the obviously it was written kind of about the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln, who was so it's very much a he's lost a leader in his life. I don't know if he knew Lincoln personally, but it sounds very personal, whether it was or not.
Yeah.
And in my life, like I lost my dad some years back, and so when I hear this poem, I think of my dad.
Yep.
The circumstances of the death are different, obviously, that kind of thing. But the emotion is there. That's who I sort of think about. I lost my leader, my dad. And anyway,
Yeah.
I love this poem, and this may be a very personal question. Have you ever lost someone in your life?
Yes, yeah. I mean, certainly. Talking of fathers, so my father passed away. I think it's just over 2 years ago now. Yeah, that's the weird thing, isn't it? Is that kind of like after the event, your whole sense of time shifts again, and it's very weird. And it's like I had a complicated relationship with my father. So it wasn't, yeah. So there's extra layers of complexity in there, but certainly he is a reference point when coming at this. But I think in our lives, going back to that kind of essential kind of core relationship of someone that you look up to, and that feeling of loss in various different like ways that engage, it's such a profound thing that it can be various different relationships that you've had, friendships that you've had, in a whole variety of different kind of circumstances. So it immediately stirs up a lot of those kind of things. And I think that's the power of great writing, is it gives that space for you to kind of bleed in a little of yourself at the same time, and it invites that without any kind of crazy metaphor, or without demanding too much, but just letting the language kind of do the work, which is, what I'm a fan of generally, rather than going, all right, now I've got to think of my dad now, or whatever, or my
Right,
cat,
right.
or whatever. Yeah, that kind of thing. Sometimes, yeah, work like that by all means, but, generally, I'm always looking to try and still the cognitive part of me as much as possible and get that out of the way, because otherwise it becomes performative in a bad sense, potentially. Famous last words. Oh, Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack. The prize we sought is won. The port is near. The bells I hear. The people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh, heart, 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 oh, the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. Oh, Captain, my Captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills. For you bouquets and ribboned wreaths, for you the shores are crowding. For you they call, the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. Here, Captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head, it is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored, safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip, the victor ship comes in with object won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I with mournful tread walk the deck, my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead.
Man, that is so good. That was glorious, beautiful. Thank you.
Oh no, well, thank you, and thanks very much for the opportunity to share it. Yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff, I'd say, definitely.
And I love hearing it like an all American poem in a different accent, in the King's English, so to speak.
In the King's English.
I love it.
So something
right.
like
It's
that.
like it kind of shows that the emotion. I don't know. Anybody can relate to it, whatever that is. I think anybody, whether you're an actor or not, can be moved by words like that. That's amazing. That's great.
I think there are certain specificities which will always kind of like conjure things. We've all seen pale lips, and we've all, seen or been the arm under the head in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's where it goes from the universal into the specific in terms of it. And it doesn't mean that you need to go, you as the actor need to go, okay, I need to think of when I was cradling, oh, where were they, or anything else like that. But it,
in the listener, it sure will gives, a lot of the time.
Yeah, but exactly, that's the great thing, is that you as the actor, you can maybe draw on something specific, but it's still, because of the language, it gives the listener that space and that permission to project their own thing. So if when you say, dear father, we've all got different fathers, who was your father figure? Whether or not it was a mentor of some kind, or whether or not it was a friend of some kind, or, any kind of combination of the above, really. But it doesn't labor the point, because it goes in different places, from the focusing on, the bouquets and the ribbons. And it's that not exactly incidental kind of like stuff, but what it does is, and it's not a misdirection, but it kind of like cuts into a kind of like a deeper emotional well of what it's actually about by focusing on the external stuff sometimes. It's like if I'm going to think, a thing about grief all of the way through, I'm not just going to talk about grief and the thing that I lost. It's kind of look at all of the other stuff that's around, which then accentuates the loss because you can't see it. Because because you've gone somewhere else, those kind of things. So that's what you're always looking for in the greatest writing, I think, is that stuff which just gives you enough space and just gives the audience enough space to go, oh yeah, I know what that is to me. Fuck. And from there, it continues to resonate for other people.
Well, where can people find you on the internet? Because at this point, a lot of folks, if they're not on TikTok or wherever, they're going to say, "Man, this guy's great. I need to hear more." And Chris is amazing as far he does a lot of monologues on TikTok from video games, classic plays, all kind of stuff, and they're amazing.
Lots of random shit, essentially. Right. So you can hear my commercial voiceover at. No, so I mean, My voiceover brand, my website, all of that kind of stuff is at naturallyrp.co.uk. And just to unpack that, because people go, what the fuck does that mean? Naturally, RP as in received pronunciation, which is quite an antiquated term in many ways now. It's the kind of thing that a lot of people, especially in the UK, rail against because, again, certainly back when I was training, there, a lot of people who had regional accents were kind of told, like, no, if you want to do Shakespeare, darling, then you need to speak in a certain way. And that way is kind of like this kind of neutral but associated with kind of upper class authority figures, people who know better than you and is going to tell you what you should be doing, so you don't have to worry your poor little mind too much about things. Slightly patronizing, yeah, that kind of thing. So that's what I go for. Well, I mean, hopefully not. But I mean, my dad was from Bognor Regis. My mum was from Belfast. Apparently that seemed to accent what I was born in Somerset in the southwest of England, where they all speak like that. And therefore, for some reason, I've just come out relatively neutral. So I thought, and also to differentiate myself from my actor's website, which is just my name, Chris Tester, I wanted to go like, okay, well, how can I make my voiceover brand different? Well, I go like, okay, well, I can do this. This is how I naturally sound. And if people go, what the hell is RP? There's an explanation on my website. So yes, that is where I exist.
And what about, I will link those obviously, and your TikTok.
It is on all of the socials. I think I'm just Chris Naturally RP. Yeah, I think, yes, that's my attempt at a brand anyway.
Well, thank you so much. I have thoroughly enjoyed talking and hearing you perform. It's amazing.
Well, thank you so much, Jake.
You've been listening to The Cultured Bumpkin, a literature podcast with Jake Phillips. Thank you very much for listening. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this, would you mind going and subscribing and leaving a nice review on whatever podcast platform you heard this on? I would really appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.